It's really bad.
Danielle Grant is starving.
I know. I'm trying to see if I can get some food because we literally don't have anything to eat today or tomorrow. So I'm going to try to make it.
I know we've been making the Italian mafia analogy a lot lately in terms of how the Democrat politicians absolutely know about the fraud that's going on amongst their states and their voter base. But at a certain point, you have to be convinced that the Democrat Party itself is simply a criminal organization. I genuinely wonder if you brought RICO charges against a lot of the organized welfare fraud networks in America, how many Democrat politicians you could bring down? I mean, that's a sincere question. Because, we've been talking a lot about Minnesota lately, and now we have a brand new update on the EBT food stamps issue, which is something by now I'm sure many conservatives are familiar with. But the headline of this week is now that up to 21 different Democrat states may be losing all food stamp SNAP benefits EBT altogether, simply because they refuse to share the data of who is actually on the SNAP, right? So it's a very simple request, and by the way, it is federal law under Big Beautiful Bill, so it's going to be obviously very difficult for a liberal judge to step in and strike it down. And after all, if the federal government is funding something and there's strict laws against fraud, it shouldn't be that complicated of an ask, especially if you claim, right, all of this stuff is a myth, right? EBT SNAP fraud is a myth, Medicaid fraud is a myth, voter fraud is the myth. Okay, then let's see the data. Why not be transparent? But of course, that is currently what they are not doing. And I'd like to point out, this is far from an isolated case. Okay, just yesterday, we're talking about how Tim Walz is refusing to release his Medicaid data from his own state, despite the fact that it's well proven that there's a bunch of fraud there obviously going on. And guys, I don't think this is an issue that really should be overthought all that much. The reason why they won't show us the data while claiming, trust us, there's absolutely no fraud, is clearly because there must be fraud going on. So nonetheless, we'll tell you about the announcement that was made by USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins in today's cabinet meeting when it comes to this EBT issue and a lot more, because apparently, as a result of Big Beautiful Bill, you're already starting to see close to 1 million people who have been kicked off of food stamps. And keep in mind, this is all just the direct number of people we know are ineligible. This does not even count the people I would argue still abuse the system, right? When I said actually the majority, I think of EBT as fraud, I didn't mean quite literally that everyone's using fake data. It's more so that there's this wrong incentive structure where people basically game the system to take advantage of that. But even then, right, you do a fairly conservative reform and they all lose their freaking minds. What is that all about? Yeah, it's almost like, as we've been saying, what you're watching right now with the Democrat Party is a very similar political machine to, say, New York back in the 1920s, right? Where you have a certain group, usually an immigrant population, but it doesn't have to be, that continually keeps voting for you. And in exchange, right, with the criminal mafias and all that, the politicians are turning a blind eye. They're, of course, defending their own fraud. And it's this repeating feedback loop of corruption. And that is so obvious. But let's get into this, guys. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work. It also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. Sorry, our upload schedule's been a little bit slow lately. We have Thanksgiving this week. Now we got the Pentagon this week. But on top of all of it, I'm extremely sick. Okay, I'm sick like a dog. So we're going to do our best here to get through this. But nonetheless, okay, so here is the announcement from Brooke Rollins today in that very cabinet meeting, simply pointing out, and again, it should be common sense, if a state will not share their data to look for and audit and verify the criminal use of SNAP benefits, then it shouldn't be receiving federal SNAP funding. That makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, take a listen.
In February of this year, we asked for all the states for the first time to turn over their data to the federal government, to let the USDA partner with them to root out this fraud, to make sure that those who really need food stamps are getting them, but also to ensure that the American taxpayer is protected. 21 states said yes, not surprised. 29 states said yes, not surprisingly, the red states. And that's where all of that data, that fraud comes from. But 21 states, including California, New York, and Minnesota, the blue states, continue to say no. So as of next week, we have begun and will begin to stop moving federal funds into those states until they comply and they tell us and allow us to partner with them to root out this fraud and to protect the American taxpayer. As Joe Biden was working to buy an election a year ago, he increased food stamp program funding by 40%. So now as we continue to roll that back.
I mean, seriously, this is not that complicated of an issue. It's as straightforward as it can get. So they run around and tell us that this is all a conspiracy, mass fraud is not happening. What have we heard, by the way? Let's recap. Illegal aliens are not receiving Medicaid. Okay, but Democrat states won't publish their Medicaid data, so how do you even know that's true? They say there's not people frauding and taking advantage of SNAP benefits, and it's not disproportionately a problem, especially among Democrat states, sanctuary states, and the like, but they won't show us the data, okay? It's actually pretty appalling when you think about it that the widespread fraud we've already found thus far is primarily coming from red states. I mean, if that's the situation in the Republican states, gee, the blue states must be an absolute disaster, right? But of course, they won't do that. And notice too, by the way, I think this is very telling, how Gavin Newsom and Democrat governors have not made a big public stand out of this, because if they somehow thought maybe they were on the right side, or at least they had a persuasive argument, then they would have a rebuttal. They would say proudly, we are not going to publish our SNAP data because of this reason or that reason, but they're just doing it pretty quietly, right? They just said no. And to this day, you're not really getting an explanation for why they refuse to show it to us. Again, I think it is pretty straightforward. I mean, use your common sense. This is not a complicated political issue at all. It is a very simple conclusion. It is the most obvious one. The Democrat Party is a criminal organization who's covering up for mass fraud in this country. And you could argue to a large degree, their entire political machine is built on the basis of fraud. Whether that's Act Blue, where it's now been proven a bunch of stolen credit cards are being used essentially to make big fundraising numbers for the Democrat Party, or what's going on in Minnesota, right? Another prime example of that, what's been going on in California with a bunch of illegal aliens receiving so much health care that now the state budget is going bankrupt, or this issue right here, right? It's not that complicated. Again, do not overthink it. But that said, here's another announcement that Brooke Rollins just made in the cabinet meeting here, confirming they already have gotten a whopping 800,000 people. That's close to 1 million people, right? Off of SNAP thus far, and that is primarily just based on fraud enforcement alone. So it tells you how much money was being thrown down the drain essentially in this country. Check it out.
Which became very much a part of the national conversation during the Democrat shutdown was SNAP reform, food stamp reform. When all of America saw what so many of us know and have been working on, but when you have so much rampant fraud in a program that 42 million Americans participate in, now big good piece of news that I hope is written about, since you became president, about 800,000 of those 42 million have moved off of food stamps, which is hopefully the plan with better jobs, higher wages, etc. But still, when we found 186,000 dead people's Social Security numbers being used, 500,000 people receiving benefits more than twice. We had a couple of people receiving benefits in 6 states. In February of this year, we asked for all the states for the first time to turn over their data to the federal government.
I mean, look at that. We've already identified and kicked off close to 1 million cases of fraud, considering that the blue states are not sharing their data. And again, keep in mind, we're looking for the very basic forms of fraud, right? The obvious ones. Oh, someone's dead. Oh, someone's receiving the benefit in 6 different states. Someone's receiving double the benefits they're supposed to be. Already 1 million people. And this is not counting what I would argue is the most prevalent form of SNAP fraud, which is not maybe fraud in the direct legal sense, but rather that someone absolutely has the ability to work. They don't desperately need this, but because they're technically eligible under perverse government incentives that basically encourage poverty instead of discourage it, that's what you're dealing with. We haven't even touched any of that. And yet Democrats tell us we're conspiracy theorists when we just found 1 million freaking cases of just dead people, double benefits, all the very obvious stuff. And then coincidentally, right? That's what we have established and proven we're going after. And let's go back to this again. And remember, the Democrat states don't want to share their data. Yeah, it's almost like what I said again. Criminal organization is exactly what's going on here with this political party. And take a listen to what Trump had to say about this, because this is also, again, the second type of fraud I'm pointing out. It wasn't meant for people that could do whatever they want, who say, well, I don't think I'll work, I'll just collect this money. It was meant for temporarily, and actually I have no problem with this, by the way. If you need it for a couple months because you just lost your job, you're trying to get back on your feet, that's one thing. It was never supposed to be an incentive for permanent poverty, right? If you're a senior citizen, if you're disabled, that's another thing. But there are so many, there's tens of millions, literally, of able-bodied people on that program in this country who absolutely could work, but simply choose not to do so. But take a listen to what he had to say.
We have to remain liquid. We can't give everything away based on a number. Here's an example. When I was president, the number that you're talking about was a tiny fraction of what it is now. Biden went totally crazy, gave it to anybody that would ask, gave it to people that were able-bodied, had no problem. Anybody that would ask, we get the number. And it's many times the number of people are on. This wasn't meant for that. It was meant for people that had real problems. In many cases, people that were down and out, people that could be saved. It wasn't meant for people that could do whatever they want, the people that say, well, I don't think I'll work, I'll just, collect this money. Take a look at the number of what it was during my administration and what it was during the Biden administration. It went up many, many times my first term.
Yeah, exactly. But let me ask you this question. Why do you think it was that the Biden administration and Democrats in general basically have this policy of let's give government benefits out to anyone and not really check all that much? Is because they actually want as many people to be on government benefits as possible. Why? Because that's buying votes. It's very simple. As we've explained many times before, right? There's no such thing truly as free money, but using that term in quotations, you know what I mean by it. People are addicted to this stuff, right? Once you give them something, it's very hard to take it away. It's like becoming addicted to a drug, right? You go up to some crazy homeless crackhead on the street and you're like, do you want to go to rehab or do you want to have another crack pipe? What answer do you think they're going to want to have? Obviously, that's true, right? And so we've already had a problem for many decades in this country of people who, yes, are abusive welfare dependents. But notice how every time Democrats are in power, basically their number one strategy, their number one priority, you could argue politically, or I guess two of them, right? Is the number one, open the borders to a bunch of people. I wonder what that's about. And number two, expand government benefits as much as possible. Why is that? Because again, we're talking about a mafia-style criminal organization that is just built on this political machine of open borders, free stuff. Open borders, free stuff. Also, you can combine the two, right? Free stuff to the illegal aliens, as we saw under the Biden administration as well. So the Democrat strategy, the approach toward politics is very clear, very transparent here. On some degree, I would argue there's probably laws being broken, but to an extent, you could also say that this is the problem with democracy, or quote unquote, this is how democracy dies, you could say, because they tell us that so much. Oh, the collapse of democracy. Let me tell you something, right? The real way that a democracy, a republic, a democratic system, whatever you want to call it, ultimately collapses is this very issue right here, right? This is how it happens, right? Because I think for a long time in this country, we managed to get by because people were virtuous and honorable, and there was this core idea of rugged individualism that it's seen as shameful, frankly, to just live off the government or something like that. But of course, what always happens, and the way we can always see this go, is eventually someone probably figures out in a democratic system, if I go to a certain group of people and just offer them free stuff and the elections every 4 years, then people are probably going to vote more for immediate gratification than actually long-term anything, right? Because, of course, there's obvious problem with the free stuff kind of approach to things, right? Long term, you're going to bankrupt the country. How is this going to be sustainable? How are we going to grow if everyone's just sitting around and not working? But again, the only incentive structure you have is not trying to think about the children's future or something. It's just win the election every 4 freaking years. And that's, of course, the hostage situation that Democrats have tried to create and put us on in this country. And it's just so obvious, right, the way this is going. And as I pointed out before about the Somalia issue, maybe you could argue at the same time. A lot of Americans, too, because of that very idea of, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, it's like not really a good thing to be living off the government. That's probably the only cultural belief that's stopping like everyone in this country from just taking advantage of the system, right? But of course, if you import a bunch of people, see where I'm going, from places where those values don't really exist or that kind of higher understanding is not normal in the culture, then there you go, right? If the native-born citizens won't fall for the free stuff trick because they're too smart, just bring in a bunch of people from the third world who, will guarantee to keep on doing it. And this is the way it goes over and over again. And it'll honestly be pretty interesting to see what the ramifications of and even a small type of crackdown on this is, right? Because I think it absolutely is the right thing to do. At the same time, Okay, Democrats understand exactly why they've held us hostage on this issue, because you could imagine all the people right now, guys, who are losing their food stamps are going to go vote for Democrats and do so very angrily in 2026. That's not me saying that it's not the right thing to do, because I think there are some issues that are bigger about just winning elections, but it's just something, right, it's important to point out. I'm illustrating to you exactly the machine here that Democrats have built. And as I said, when you look at the widespread amount of fraud that is just being a blind eyes being turned to it, totally criminal organization 100%. And I think this video right here perfectly summarizes everything that we just talked about. Take a listen.
Trump has cut my food stamps from $2,800 down to $350. Now, what am I supposed to do? So I literally just got this piece of mail today saying that due to new policy changes from the Trump administration, all this shit, whatever, that all these cuts and whatever he's doing over there, now they're telling me I have to go work. Now I have to go do all this. Well, I literally got 5 kids. Okay, I'm trying to sit here and spend time with them. I'm not trying to go work, 50, 60 hours a week so I can pay bills. I just really don't understand. I voted for him this last election because I thought what he had good was going on, but now all of a sudden, all this policy stuff's coming out, and now he's making all these cuts, and now he doesn't want to help the less fortunate people no more. I'm done with that guy. I'm not. If he gets voted in again, I'm leaving this country, because I'm not dealing with this no more. This is all shit.
Yeah, so I have no idea whether he's telling the truth about having voted for Trump or not. It really doesn't matter. The point here is still the same. You're a prime example of everything that we're talking about, because he said it there himself. First and foremost, I like to point out, he's not even losing all of his SNAP benefits, right? It's basically just going from the government was paying his entire grocery bill for the entire month to now just a little bit of a helping hand with it, which after all, dude, I'd like to point out, it is called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, not the permanent one, not the total one, supplemental. What does that word mean? It's supposed to just be a minor helping hand, not everything for you, dude. By the way, close to $3,000 a month is a ton of money. Okay, that's a lot of money just be receiving from the government. I don't even care if you have 5 kids. But then he goes on to basically admit exactly what we're theorizing here, right? Here you have a guy who's not genuinely disabled, even not genuinely really working all that hard. He's basically saying, man, I don't want to have to work full-time or a little more than full-time, right? 50 to 60 hours a week, because I have kids. I want to spend time with my kids, man. That's so messed up. So in other words, right, you could totally be working right now. And, newsflash, I know it sucks, but sometimes, my parents, like my mom especially, or her family was like this. Even my parents worked a lot growing up. Yeah, guess what? When you have children, when you have family, a lot of normal people, even if they're not poor necessarily, have to work a lot and don't get to see their kids all the time. Such is life. I don't know what else to tell you about that. Maybe you could argue the system shouldn't be that way. But you right now are currently facing the dilemma that, frankly, even the rich ones, right? Most Americans just have to deal with. Where's the balance between working and providing and being able to see my kids? So I don't even understand what kind of sob story that is, right? I just want to spend time with my kids. Yeah, buddy, guess what? Everybody does. Everybody does. But not everybody's getting a free check from the government, so that way they don't have to work, frankly, a pretty normal work schedule, especially if you're kind of in a situation where you're trying to move yourself up in life, right? If you want to be able to provide for those kids, then you got to work hard. I mean, that's just how it goes, right? I know I'm probably sounding like a pretentious jerk right now, but genuinely, this is the actual challenge. This is the actual thing that most people have to go through. But for whatever reason, right, this guy just decided, he doesn't want to work that hard when all these other people are working that hard, and, they have to deal with that stuff with their kids. And then suddenly now he's like, what? I have to live the life of a normal person, a normal dad? You're telling me everyone has to deal with this? Yes, dude. The answer is yes there. But anyways, that said, let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. I mean, do you agree with kind of the assessment we're making here? What do you think of the Democrat states clearly having something going on? Let me know. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.